Daughter, when she was between the ages of 18 months to 3, every other week she would get bad colds, ear infections.
Was she at daycare?
It was daycare.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
It is. It's daycare. Well, my Colorado kids that came don't go to daycare. They take turns watching. So, and they were the ones that got sick, but they probably got sick on the plane.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you heard anything.
I remember I would get, so she'd come
Okay, we're going to call to order Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners. This is a budget hearing meeting for the 2020 budget. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Can we have the roll call, please?
Kofia? Hunley?
Here.
Jewett?
Here.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am. Oops, there's Sonny.
Klaus?
Here.
LaPointe?
Here.
Henschel?
Here. Okay, so next up is our first public comment. Would you please read the rules?
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners which is required to be open to the public under the provisions of the Michigan Open Meetings Act. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. Any person wishing to address the board shall state his or her name and address. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions, if any. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chairperson may, at his or her discretion, allow an additional opportunity or time to speak if determined germane and necessary to the discussion. Public comment will be solicited during the 2 public comment periods noted in Rule 5.4, Order of Business. However, public comment may be received during the meeting when a specific agenda topic is scheduled for discussion by the board. Prior to the first public comment, the chairperson will indicate the topics on the agenda for which public comment will be accepted. Members of the public wishing to comment should raise their hand or pass a note to the clerk in order to be recognized and shall not address the board until called upon by the chairperson. Please be respectful and refrain from personal or political attacks.
Okay, would anyone like to address the board? First public comment.
Good morning, Noelle Muggenberg. Yeah, silly to give my address.
We know who you are.
Good morning. I'm here this morning as a member of the public and the Grand Traverse County Prosecuting Attorney because I was told that I would not be placed on the agenda today. The Prosecuting Attorney is a constitutional office with duties that are defined generally by MCL 49.153 and more specifically by over 425 different statutes. My proposed budget for 2020 included a request for an additional APA Level 1, which would allow my office to maintain the current service levels despite a rapidly growing complexity of cases, participation in more treatment courts than ever. We're now up to 6. And the additional responsibilities that have been placed on my office by the implementations of the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission standards. Specifically for us, those started in June of this year. It's worth noting that because 3 experienced attorneys left my office late 2018 and in early 2019, even with the addition of a new attorney, our 2020 personnel budget would still be less than it was in 2019. Additionally, I'm trying to be creative and look for increased sources of revenue. Under MCL 49.31, it is up to you, the board, to authorize the appointment of as many assistant prosecutors as you deem necessary. And so before you make that very important decision, one that directly impacts the ability of my office to perform statutory obligations, I was frankly hoping to have more than 3 minutes to speak. So first, I would ask that you take a vote. As a majority, you can determine whether my proposal deserves more than 3 minutes, and I'd ask to be added to allow to present at a future meeting, or at the very least to be added to the agenda today, so that I could better explain to you why I'm asking for that additional assistant, so that I might answer any questions that you have, so that you're equipped to make an informed decision.
How long would you like, Noel?
If I could have
10 minutes?
15 minutes.
15? Go ahead. You can go right now.
Is that,
Yeah, that's fine.
okay. I thought that there had to be a vote, but that's,
Can I
Chairman
just-
controls public comment time, so I'll give you 15 minutes if that's what you need.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask a quick question germane to this? At our last regular county commission meeting, there was discussion about there being requests from several departments, and there was discussion also of asking all of those who were making those requests to come in and make presentations. My understanding from that last meeting was that that was the plan. Has that changed? And if so, who decided that we were not going to allow department heads to make presentations about why they are asking for these staffing changes? Because that was not part of
I
the
was
decision at the last meeting.
Told by admin that there was no presentation sent when they sent the packets out.
Are we telling
Is that my understanding
department
correct?
heads and elected officials that they may not be, as part of this budget hearing process, able to make formal presentations? Is that the
We
message
can
to them?
request as few or as many. It's up to the commissioners.
And,
as to
and
what
like
they
I
wanna
said, it was
hear.
informal, but it seemed like there was consensus that we were willing to hear from the department heads and elected. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding.
Do you want to
where we're
hear
at.
from everybody?
There were several department heads and electeds who did request, and I think it's more than fair. I actually thought that was going to be part of this process. So, Mr. Alger, is that not going to be a part of this process?
The process is up to you. The department heads that have requested budgets or have requested staff that were general fund requests, those determinations are made by my office and administration. The elected officials, this is a discussion that you should have with them if you choose to have it with them.
Okay, and then just, I guess, to continue off of that, the statement that you made when you did this presentation was that it was a growing and evolving document.
correct.
And in fact, you had someone from the health department who had come in the day before, and you were re-looking at that. So I thought we were in a dynamic process that would include presentations from those requesting these staff changes. So I would like to hear from them.
All of them?
Formally, yeah, there were several departments, but it's not all of them. Yes, and that was what was informally discussed at the last meeting. So
This
it would
is
be
a-
helpful to get clarity, I think, for everyone involved.
I think if you want to go through every request, I think you should read them first.
I did.
But,
I requested them from admin. to
you
send
know, my
to all
take
of
is
us.
this, is Nate Alger has been hired as our administrator. There's a lot of requests that he said don't fit the budget. He's not recommending them. So what we're doing is listening to everyone telling us why he's wrong. And if there's a compelling reason, certainly I'll listen, but I don't want to see a parade of people asking for money. Then, this is why I want more people, even though we were told a current services budget.
But I heard that, and then I also heard that the administration was in negotiations with some of those departments based on what they had come back with the day before our last meeting. So again, dynamic process, and ultimately, we do have to decide whether or not to agree with the budget, right?
Certainly.
So, I mean, I would defer to some of my colleagues who've been here longer. Is it typical that we just don't have presentations from those requesting these additional staffing or major budget adjustments? May I ask Mr. Wheelock?
90% of the time, if it's a department that's requesting it, we don't see it because that's handled by the administration.
Okay.
If it's an elected official that's managing it, we usually hear from the elected officials. And, as near as I can think anyway, the elected officials that are requesting additional staff are sitting here today. And I'm assuming that we're going to hear from both of them.
It sounded like the impression was that they were not being given anything other than 3 minutes of public comment.
They are here to answer commissioners' questions, and if commissioners want to hear their whole presentation, that's fine. But
Just-
there was nothing provided to put in the packet, so we don't have slides, or all we have is verbal reports at this point.
So the sheriff, may I add to that? The sheriff's department provided you a significant amount of information to support their staffing requests. Ms. Mogenberg has also provided a letter detailing her requests, her support for her request, and they're here today. Now, the agenda was set. We had sent out a request for presentations for this meeting, and we did not have presentations at the deadline. So this discussion is ongoing right now, and it's dynamic, absolutely.
And so I understand with the electeds. But again, here we have the health department. That's not an elected official, but we're reconsidering those requests based on what they brought to us.
Yes,
Is that going to come in front of us?
yes, it will.
Okay.
So we are currently discussing that. Wendy and I spoke about it yesterday afternoon, about 2 of the 3 positions, and the recommended budget is going to change. This date and the following study session date is designed for the board to interact with what I believe to be elected officials or the administration and tell us what you would like to see with that budget. We have presented to you, based on what our beliefs have been by just general direction of the board, a balanced budget that has the best interest of the county in mind. If you have something specific that you want to see or add to that budget, this is the opportunity for you to discuss that with us. I know that the sheriff and the prosecutor are the only 2 elected officials that have said, I want to come to the board and present to the board our requests and have a discussion about this budget process with you. The department heads, I have had a couple department heads talk to me about their budget requests, and we are working through those items. Ultimately, on the final date of passage of this budget, this board needs to be comfortable with what the administration has presented, and that there has been an opportunity for at least the discussion about specific budgets by department. The health department, I have had a conversation with Wendy yesterday about the 2 of the 3 positions that are grant funded. We have a better understanding of what that means. That will probably be in the recommended budget, the final budget that is presented to you on whatever date that is, whether it's November 6th or November 20th. That will be in that budget, and you'll have updates as we go along. This study session is designed for the board to ask us questions and give us direction as to what you want to see in that budget.
Okay, we're at public comment, and I have given our prosecutor up to 15 minutes if she wants to talk, and then take commissioner questions about your request.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would kind of request that this information not be put in under public comment, that we actually, as part of the 2020 budget discussion, hear from the prosecutor and the sheriff at that time, not list them as public comment. It's just, I believe it's,
Okay.
minimizes the appearance of their presentation if we just put it under public comment, for lack of a better term.
Okay,
I agree with that.
Thank you, Commissioner.
okay, so we'll add the 15-minute discussion under the budget discussion, is that? the will
Under
of the
budget
board?
discussion, I guess what I'd like
Okay.
to see is a place under budget discussion to hear from the prosecutor and to hear from the sheriff.
Okay,
And I guess as long as Wendy's here, if she wants to make some comments about hers, because we also received a letter yesterday about her sanitarian system position. You know,
Okay.
I don't want to get into, the crux with what the administrator does, but, I think at least the basic premise is that general fund positions are not in this budget unless we identify funding for them. So, in order to talk about the validity of whether or not those positions are necessary, we also have to talk about where they're being paid for. And I don't have a problem hearing from at least the 2 elected officials when we can choose whether or not we hear from Wendy today. But I would like to hear from the 2 elected officials that are requesting as part of the budget discussion, not as part of public comment.
okay. Is there any objection to letting them talk under the budget discussions versus public comment? Okay, we will do that. Is
No,
there-
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I would move, though, to try to limit this meeting till 2 hours today to go till 10 o'clock is all.
Okay, motion to limit this meeting to 10 o'clock, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion and a second, any discussion? All right,
Well, yes, I'll just
Commissioner
comment.
Kafia,
Yes.
go ahead.
I appreciate, and I would love for us to be really efficient, and also, I guess I just have to acknowledge that this board has spent plenty more than 2 hours talking about a lot of issues that frankly maybe have less consequence than the county's financial plan and budget for 2020, so I don't want to rush this. Can you just reiterate, we have additional budget hearings, including a public hearing coming up. So just on principle, I won't support it, even though I would like to also get out of here by 10. We've spent a lot of time talking about all sorts of issues that don't necessarily impact us the way the county budget does.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Roll call vote, please.
Hunley,
No.
Jewett,
Yes.
Wheelock,
Yes.
Klaus,
Yes.
Lapointe,
Yes.
Kofia.
No.
Henschel.
Yes. Motion carries. We will set an end time for this meeting at 10 a.m. Any further public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on in the agenda. This is the recommended 2020 budget discussion. We will invite the elected officials who've showed up today to speak to us. Any commissioner comments or questions to start off the discussion? Okay. Noel or Mr. Sheriff? Good morning.
Good morning. Tom Bensley, Grand Traverse County Sheriff. Really confused here with this process. We are not prepared today because we were told we would not have this opportunity. So the 5 or 6 people we had lined up to come and speak to our budget request, I called them yesterday and said we are not going to have an opportunity. Captain Clark is not here with his presentation for interdiction team members. Members of the state police, Traverse Narcotics team, and the city police are not here because we didn't expect this opportunity. So, what I would like to do is to read you an article that appeared in a local newspaper on January 18th, 2019. 2/3 of drug activity in northern Michigan is centered in Grand Traverse County. The drug problem is further evidenced by the fact that the Drug Enforcement Agency recently assigned 2 agents to the Traverse Narcotics team. The Department of Homeland Security, ICE, also recently assigned 1 agent to the Traverse City Traverse Narcotics team office. These federal partners, in the effort to curtail drug use and drug trafficking at the effort to curtail drug use and drug trafficking allow the investigations to extend to other states and countries. In 2016, the Sheriff's Office initiated a 4-officer interdiction team. After noting an increase in larceny, drug crimes, and drug overdose cases as a responsible, preemptive effort to reduce and deter crime. Unfortunately, staffing doesn't permit the team to operate on a full-time basis, so they only work once or twice a month. The team has been successful over the past 2 years. It works and shares information with the Traverse Narcotics team and developed and advanced more effective criminal drug cases. The team is available on an on-call basis for an immediate response and was used on numerous occasions to assist the Sheriff's Office detectives and TNT when needed. The interdiction team also focuses on high crime areas with information provided by our crime mapping system and directed traffic patrol and enforcement in areas that are noted for higher than average traffic crashes, speeding, and other more serious traffic violations. Blair Township was identified as the township in Grand Traverse County with the most serious and fatal accidents involving alcohol by the Michigan State Police Office of Highway Safety Planning. The legalization of recreational marijuana will only add to the impaired driving problem. Grand Traverse County has seen a 17% increase in population since 2005. The daily influx of workers and shoppers from surrounding communities compounds the traffic congestion. Don't forget the huge increase in population during the summer months. Our calls for service and investigations increased 80% in the last 15 years. Grand Traverse County has not funded additional deputies in the last 13 years, and we have 2 fewer officers than we had in 2003. A Grand Traverse County Commissioner requested the cost of a full-time interdiction team. At the December 19th Board of Commissioners meeting, the Sheriff's Office was prepared to outline a plan to establish a full-time interdiction team with actual costs and a funding plan. However, we weren't allowed to address the commission because the presentation was removed from the agenda at the start of the meeting. It's disappointing that the commission declined to listen to the prepared presentation. Not a good lesson in governmental transparency, and it denied the residents of Grand Traverse County an opportunity to hear from the county's primary law enforcement agency on how to proactively address illegal drug activity and high crime areas and provide directive traffic enforcement when and where needed. Hopefully, the incoming Board of Commissioners will be more open-minded and willing to listen to the request to hire 2 police officers to enable our interdiction team to function on a full-time basis. I would request 2 things. Number 1, for us to have an opportunity to present to you our request for additional officers. Number 1, when we are prepared. Obviously, that's not today. And number 2, to work with the finance director, because I think there is money in the county's budget to support 2 additional police officers for the sheriff's office. Thank you.
Any commissioners have any questions for the sheriff? Commissioner Jewett?
Sheriff? I was just wondering on your current staffing levels, how many vacancies do you have right now for your officers that you're looking for?
How many vacancies do we
Yeah, I
have
mean, how many
in the law
positions do you
enforcement
currently-
division?
How many positions are you currently allowed but are vacant?
We are full-staffed.
Okay.
Currently
Earlier this
full-staffed.
summer, you were short a few officers, weren't you?
That fluctuates up and down.
Okay. No, I just wanted to see if it's changed or anything. so.
We're anticipating a retirement. We have one officer's been on light duty for 8 months, roughly. And so we're short those 2 possibilities. But
And
fully
then-
staffed, yes.
And then on this interdiction team, is this the same interdiction team that was patrolling one of these 4-way stops or something this summer during construction that was, it was in the Record Eagle there, but they were actually sitting at one of the stop signs that were set up here. Is that the same team?
I'm not quite sure what you,
There was an article in the Record Eagle this summer when 8th Street closed down there about the Grand Traverse interdiction team.
yes, I
patrolling.
believe, I believe they spent a day at the request of the city police department to check the traffic in their neighborhood down there due to the 8th Street construction.
Okay, I mean, to me, I would think an interdiction team, if I understand correctly, would be better utilized doing interdiction stuff than traffic stuff, but, okay. No, I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
Commissioner Kafia, and then Commissioner LaPointe.
I would just like clarity from Sheriff Bensley as well as Prosecutor Muggenberg. I would like to understand where the message came from that the duly elected officials who run offices full-time were not going to be allowed to make presentations to this board. Where did that come from? Where did that come from?
Well,
You said you
I do
canceled
know that-
yesterday because
okay,
you were told.
Yes. The undersheriff, I do know that our request, a week ago, went out last Monday. Captain Clark sent it over to this building.
Within the 10-day,
Okay.
meeting the
To be
10-day
distributed-
requirement, yeah.
Be distributed. I was out of town Thursday, Friday, and Monday.
Okay.
And when I got back yesterday, the undersheriff explained to me that there would be no budget presentations, that the information that we sent over, it wasn't in the package. I can't speak directly to that because he was the one who had communications with the administrative wing. So our understanding was no presentations.
And I'll just say that I can appreciate the disadvantage. You want to be able to come and make a reasonable presentation. I did some math. We have 8 requests. That's not all elected. So if we limit it to elected, I think it's 2. We have 8, and if we gave them each 20 minutes with a prepared presentation instead of maybe you get public comment and maybe we're going to throw you on the agenda at the last minute, that's still barely, not even 3 hours. So I'm concerned about this dynamic, and I can appreciate that, yes, I'm an elected official who is tasked to approve this budget. However, I don't work here full-time, and I don't run a department with dozens of employees. And so whether or not I'm going to approve the sheriff and Prosecutor Muggenberg or any of the department heads' requests, it feels I'm uncomfortable with not giving them the courtesy of being able to make their presentation to the full board, who ultimately is supposed to vote yea or nay. So I still think we should give them, the opportunity to make their actual full presentation instead of coming in here on the fly with no opportunity to make that presentation.
Well, that's not quite accurate.
Okay?
And I agree with you. They should be given the ability to speak to you. Absolutely. That is the board's decision. We sent out an email to all staff saying, including the prosecutor and the sheriff, asking for presentations for this agenda, and there were no presentations to be offered. That was the response. You have the information that was given to us by the prosecutor and the sheriff for justification of their staff positions. But for a presentation to this board, Chris Kramer sent the email out, and the answer was we do not have a presentation for this board. So I'm not sure, the board, you have to direct us with what you want to see from these presenters.
And perhaps it was a mistake that I didn't put it in a formal motion at the last meeting, but I definitely talked about, and there were several on this board who seemed to agree that we did want to hear from electeds and department heads who were requesting this additional staffing as part of this process. And it wasn't just getting the email from you, which I appreciate you did send, but actually having that be a dynamic part with presentations from these elected officials and department heads. So if that was my mistake in not putting it in a formal motion, I would like to put it in a formal motion now that we have that at the very least from the electeds,
We do that in a study session.
if not from the department heads.
We're in a study session, you can't make.
Okay.
Well, it's a procedural question.
Yeah, what would have been the appropriate point?
it's
Can
a-
I not get it into the budget hearing now because I didn't make it at a regular
Make your
board
motion.
meeting?
Make your motion.
I don't want to break the rules. The rules are we can't actually vote on anything in a study session. The clerk is right. So what is
It's a
our option?
Procedural question.
We could suspend our rules, I suppose,
Don't
right?
need- Don't need to. We're not voting on whether we're buying new carpet. We're voting on how we're going to proceed in our meeting.
I think it's a very appropriate ask. I know that the sheriff and the prosecutor wanted to speak to the board. I said that at the presentation of our budget.
That's
If
right.
you wish to hear them, by all means.
Out of respect, if nothing else, again,
If
for
you're
the
going to make
position
a
that they
motion,
hold.
make it.
Is
I'm
it
at-
possible to add to that?
Go ahead.
I wasn't told I was told that I would be placed on the agenda on October 23rd. I was not told to submit anything, a packet, anything prior to that until Thursday. I think I got an email from Chris Kramer.
And the packet has to go out Friday, yeah.
Right, saying we need this by tomorrow morning. I had a full docket in circuit court on Friday, and I don't know if something happened, but that is when I got that. And if it was my misunderstanding, because I thought when admin relayed to the commissioners that we wanted to speak, if that was enough to get us on the agenda, then that was my mistake. But as far as providing my PowerPoint, things like that, letters from judges that were in support of this, I was notified on Thursday. So I just want the commissioners to be
Okay.
aware of that.
So if you don't have a motion to make, we'll go to the next commissioner who would like to speak.
I have a motion to make.
Okay, make it.
I move that we extend the courtesy to our elected officials and the 6 department heads to submit formal presentations for our next budget hearing, and to have the opportunity to speak for 15 minutes each and answer questions.
Budget session, not budget
Budget
hearing.
session. budget session. Thank you.
Okay. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Friendly amendment now or at the seconding point?
Second would be
Second,
great.
that's
Okay.
support.
And go ahead.
And with a friendly amendment that for the upcoming meeting, that the materials of the, that you are going to speak about
Be in the
also be in the packet so that they're provided in a timely manner, because it is a big beef with me to get blindsided with stuff at the meeting. So I would like them to be in the packet, but yes, I would definitely like you to have the opportunity to speak next week.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to allow the 8
Yep.
department heads
Yep.
15
minutes
minutes at our next, you're talking October 30th?
The next calendar date, which is October 30th next
Okay.
week.
Discussion. Commissioner Wheelock?
Well, the comment I made in our meeting last week, and the sheriff quoted it in the newspaper, was the dog and pony show. I don't want that. If there's valid reasons, absolutely. But I've sat through these budget sessions where, the line is out the door with people wanting everything from additional personnel to a different desk to, different lightings and, all kinds of issues. I think we have legitimate need to talk about some additional staffing in some areas, but I will absolutely acknowledge that the administration provided us with a balanced budget. And this is the first draft of the budget. If we want to change it, that is within our authority. But it is also our responsibility to, when we change that budget, to identify where we're paying for it. And it's real easy to sit here and say, the sheriff needs two more deputies and the prosecutor needs an ADA, but we have to identify where we're going to pay for it. Are we going to use fund balance? Are we going to use, there's a contingency fund in there? Or are we gonna cut something out? We only have so much pie. So if we want to change how we spend the money, we have to be willing to do the homework to figure out how we're gonna pay for it. The administration absolutely did their part. They provided us a balanced budget, spending exactly what we're receiving in revenue or as we anticipate in revenue. Now, we all know that there will be some carryover budget from the 2019 budget that's not going to be expended. We know that. That'll go back into a fund balance. We know we have an existing fund balance. We have committed to lower the percentage of our fund balance, and we committed how we're going to spend some of that money, which is a whole nother discussion. But the fact is, administration did their part. They provided us with a balanced budget. I believe it is appropriate to hear from these departments about if they need additional staffing. But it is our responsibility to figure out how we pay for it.
Totally agree.
Okay. Commissioner LaPointe?
I agree with Commissioner Wheelock. I'll vote no with the addition of the other 8 departments giving their pitches. That's called micromanagement. As was said earlier, we've hired a professional. They have a staff. They focused on it. And I have no intent to micromanage and get into the discussion on why they made this decision to not agree on this head in this department and add a head in another department. That's what they're hired to do. And if you're not happy with them, then that's another issue. We're an hour and we've got less than an hour and a half to finish this. I'd like to move on. I've got some questions for the sheriff based on some of his comments, so I'd like to just get into the process and move on. And as Commissioner Wheelock said, if you start listening to other departments and starting to agree that they need a head, it's your responsibility, in my mind, to find a head to take out in another department. So you don't want to get into that game. Rely on them to do a good job, give us a balanced budget. We've given them guidelines to work by, committing $7 million to the pension deficit, a balanced budget, 25% of a fund balance, of maintaining that, and let's move on.
Okay, we're ready to vote on the motion. Roll call.
So the motion is to include the elected officials and the other departments?
All 8
Elected
department
officials and
heads.
department heads to submit formal presentations and have 15 minutes to speak and have the materials included in the packet prior to the meeting.
Throwing in one more question. To the extent that we already got a presentation that had most people not asking for any additional things, if we're now opening it up to all the departments, I'm not trying to take the lid off and now have everybody start, saying, oh, well, if we're asking, then I'll ask for one more. Kind of like, my intent is the two that are here and the other couple that were specifically in the PowerPoint presentation that you gave us last week. If they want to come and give us the detail, I'm willing to listen to that. If there are other departments, I don't want to suddenly get a whole bunch of new requests.
This is specifically for the staffing request that was included in the PowerPoint, those 8 specific departments / elected officials. Just to be clear, I'm not asking to open up and anybody who wants to buy a new desk, just come in and pitch, rework Mr. Alger, all of his work. I'm talking about those specific staffing requests.
I mean, we had the prosecutor, the sheriff's office, family court.
IT,
And IT.
health department,
Health department.
they're all
I mean,
right here.
and I think some of them you had already worked out, and I'm satisfied if you've worked it out and they've worked it out. I don't need to hear from them, but if we still have unresolved issues.
Well, I'll say, my concern is that, what's already been echoed by Commissioner LaPointe and Wheelock is that these are recommendations brought forth by our administrator. If he's not recommending something, there's got to be a reason. Like Commissioner Cuffey has said, we're not here all day. We're very part-time, well,
Agreed.
supposed to be anyway. So we need to count on somebody to make those decisions. And if we're going to second guess and if we do the dog and pony show, as you call it, and we give some people stuff and not to other people, I think that might set a precedent going forward for the rest of this commission's term, is every time there's a decision that the administrator says, no, we're going to get a request to come and pitch us and tell us why he's wrong and they're right. So
Been there, done that.
yeah, so those are my concerns. Now, I think all our department heads are doing the best they can. They want to run the best possible department they can. So I have no ill will towards that. I think they're doing the best they can. But somebody has to say the buck stops here, and I believe we've hired Administrator Alger to do that for us. So any further discussion before we vote?
Yeah, this is not looking to open Pandora's box. This is with these specific requests, right? And the part of our job is to deliberate. I think we would be remiss to just take on face value and rubber stamp something of this magnitude. I'm not questioning the administrator's work at all. I'm saying I think we have some due diligence to do, and this is a part of that.
Commissioner Jewett?
I know the motion is for the elected officials and 8 department heads, but I still think
6 department heads.
we need to limit it to the ones that are in the presentation here instead of opening up the whole can to all 8. I mean, like, I think it was Commissioner LaPointe may have mentioned that many department heads did not ask for anything more, so I don't know that we need to even offer that. I mean, we can offer it, I guess, if we want, but I think we're just, opening up a can of worms there.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Wheelock?
Well, I'm going to vote no on the motion. If the motion fails, I will make a motion that we hear from the elected officials. I believe that the day-to-day operation of the departments is the responsibility of administration, and I'm not micromanaging that.
Okay.
Departments that think they need more, they can make an argument to the administration, and they can tell how they're going to pay for it if they in fact going to need it.
Okay.
Can I just add a policy? It's more of a policy question. So we're not asking for additional dollars for our positions, but we have to be able to add staff with the revenues that we do receive from grants and fees, which sometimes increase. So as a department head, I'm sort of stuck within the county policy that says any additional FTEs have to be approved by the board, but yet I'm not asking for additional general revenue dollars. I already have the support for those positions.
Okay, that's a conversation you should have with Mr. Alger, who would then recommend to
Will
us.
recommend.
But can I
us to
ask a
staffing
question in that regard?
Yeah.
Oftentimes during the course of the year, well, we've been here less than a year, you'll come up and there'll be an adjustment to the budget because there's a grant that's been received and you'll
Right.
add ahead accordingly. So we have a process in place that should grants come in, I think everyone that's,
And we can do that as they come, but we also know at a certain time of the year what our grants are going to be for the next. We kind of get an influx at the end of summer and fall of what our grant projections from the state and feds are going to be for fiscal year 2020. So we're just trying to incorporate that into the budget process in order to move forward. If we need to do it as a separate, that's fine. I just need to know that as a department head.
If it's that logical, you should be able to explain it to Mr. Alger, who will present it to us. And if he isn't recommending it, it doesn't make sense to him,
He can't approve increased FTEs
Right, he can
himself.
recommend to the
Still has-
board.
Okay, that's fine. I will continue to work with you,
Yeah.
Nathan.
let's have a,
just
I'm-
for
I'm-
clarification, what we're concerned about is the general fund.
yeah.
And grants and that are,
But they're still under
I-
what the
no, I
policies
realize,
are.
but I think-
That's what the struggle is for me, so I
Okay, so it's a
appreciate that.
procedural thing, not
So I
a-
don't necessarily need to give a presentation to you, because
Okay.
I'm not looking for additional
any
general funds.
grant money you get, shoot the lock off.
Well, I can't.
Well, these are the things that we talk about on a daily basis. So Wendy and I spoke about this yesterday. It's not that easy. It's not that easy to tell Wendy, you have all this grant money, go find all the grant money you can find and hire whomever you want. Because there is a county allocation to this. We're working through this, and I understand it, but it's not just as simple to say, hey, I have grant funding, hire somebody.
Right.
It's not that easy.
Yeah, there's,
And you
So
were,
somebody has to provide the oversight to the departments. That's why you are here. Because if you would say, hey, anybody who has a millage dollar or grant dollar, go ahead and spend it. That is not correct. You have oversight. And there's a reason you have oversight.
and you weren't recommending this in your original budget proposal, but that is being reevaluated, is that correct? On this, in this particular department head's case?
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to allow all 8 requesters 15 minutes to present. Let's have a roll call vote, please.
Jewett,
No.
Wheelock,
No.
Klaus,
no.
Lapointe,
No,
Kofia,
Yes.
Hunley,
Yes.
Henschel.
No.
Motion fails.
Motion fails.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that we have the elected officials who have requested additional staffing be prepared to make presentation to us at our October 30th meeting in regard to additional staffing required.
Support.
Could you specify the elected officials,
Elected officials who have requested staffing.
specifically being sheriff and prosecutor? Is there any more?
Yes, because I believe the judges also requested additional staffing.
Yeah, family court, I think, has a request for a point, something at
So 3, is that right?
Yep.
I believe
Yeah.
that's all.
It's all
I
family
don't think
court,
circuit or
yes.
district.
Yeah, family court. It's all here.
That's correct.
Prosecutor, sheriff. Yep. family
Okay,
court.
so the motion is to allow,
Those elected officials who are requesting additional staffing in the 2020 budget make presentation to the Board of Commissioners at their October 30th meeting.
okay.
and will they have their presentation in the packet?
I would certainly hope so.
Do you want a time frame on it, Mr. Wheelock?
Well,
Who
you're gonna add that in
seconded
your
that?
Yeah,
motion?
So it's moved by Wheelock, supported by Jewett, to allow elected officials who are requesting extra staffing to present at the October 30th meeting.
And the
And staff will
information.
be directed to have information to the administration office by the 20th, so as that we can have it in our packet.
Okay.
You're here.
Is that,
With
you
the
okay with that?
presentation.
Not by
of
the
the
20th,
packet.
because today's 23rd.
It'd be this Friday,
Yeah, okay.
That goes out this Friday. Okay.
Thursday.
Discussion on the motion. Commissioner Lapointe.
I'll vote yes on that, but I'm curious of the format. We've been presented a balanced budget based on the guidelines. If someone comes forward and says we need 3 additional people at a cost of $250,000 fully burdened, do we just then tell administration to go ahead and find the $250,000 by?
No, not necessarily. That's our
Well, let me just-
responsibility to determine.
Let me just finish. I mean, this thing can go on forever and ever, then he'll have to come back and where he's going to make the appropriate cut. You know, the fact of the matter is, we still have a huge issue facing us, as I've said multiple times. on the pension debt. We're $46 million in debt. We're still ranked, as of the end of 2018, dead last of the counties that MERS accounts for. And I have a concern that, yes, they're going to come, and they're all going to come up with valid requirements to raise those service level, et cetera, et cetera. But unless we're willing to say, okay, and here's where we're going to find the money, to just pass it back to administration, go sort it out, I just don't know how that's going to work. So I'm willing to listen. Both the sheriff and the prosecuting attorney gave us a packet, I believe, on the 14th with their requests. I did read through it. They're valid requests. Who can argue with those needs? But if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. And that's my concern, is that we'll all agree these are all valid requests, but where are we going to find the money? So I'll vote yes to listen, but I'm not optimistic that we'll be able to magically say, okay, we agree with them and fill those slots. So,
Yeah, I share the same concern with this motion as the last one is, we have an administrator that's here full-time. He knows this county better than most of us, at least. I don't know, Commissioner Wheelock's been here a long time too, but he lives and breathes this stuff. If it doesn't look like it fits in the budget, I'm apt to agree with that. And I'm not against listening and hearing them out, but at the same time, I think any of our departments could sell us on a good reason they need extra staff. And I'm not saying never, maybe it's not in this budget, maybe it's in a future budget. Eventually we're gonna need that interdiction team, but our administrator's telling us this doesn't fit the current services model. We're focusing on paying down that pension debt. That's my feeling, so. Any further discussion on the motion? Roll call vote, please.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Klaus?
Yes.
LaPointe?
yes.
Kofia?
Yes.
Hunley?
Yes?
Jewett?
Yes.
Henschel?
No. Motion carries. All right. Are we ready to hear from our, you want to talk now, or you just want to talk on the 30th? Answer some questions now, get some more to come back with?
No, I'm not, as I said earlier, not prepared. We called off everybody because it was our impression. I don't know about the back and forth. You said information you got on the 14th. The administrator says, well, there was nothing sent. I don't know. All I know is that we expected to be here to have a presentation, and that bus ran off the cliff sometime over the weekend.
Sheriff,
So,
your requests were sent out on the 14th.
yes, but, so, I don't know. Maybe somebody didn't get the email or the text. I would like to make a couple of comments regarding what the administrator has recommended. He's in a tough spot. He used to be the undersheriff at the sheriff's office. If he says, I think the sheriff needs 2 more people, everybody would say, well, he's buddy-buddy with the sheriff. And Wendy Trout or the prosecutor would cry foul because he's giving us a fair advantage. So when he recommends a balanced budget, he, I think, takes direction from this board, is my understanding. And did he have direction not to have any additional people or staffing increases? I don't know that. He's in a tough spot with the sheriff's office. Other departments, not so. But I think he would be criticized by other departments and elected officials if the sheriff's office requested additional people and were granted those requests. However, other departments, such as the prosecutor, may not have. So we will be here on the 30th and make our presentation, make our pitch. I will be talking with the finance director about options for funding. I said before, I think there's some money in the county's budget that could be used to fund our interdiction people. The other note is obviously with hiring and if approved, it wouldn't take effect for 6 months. We'd have to have a promotional process. We'd have to hire 2 people. We have to get them trained up for those vacancies. So it's not something that's going to start January 1st. I can tell you that. So if you have questions on our budget, we receive no questions, at least that I'm aware of, from any commissioners on our overall budget. So if you have those, I think the process was to send them to the administrator. I asked of him to forward those requests or those questions to us so we could be prepared to answer them on the entire budget.
Commissioner Wheelock.
One comment that I am compelled to make, the sheriff talked about the presentation about the interdiction team in December. I believe, in fairness to the previous Board of Commissioners, it was felt that that process should be part of the 2020 budget. We were told in December it would be at least 6 months before these people would be in place. There was no way that we were going to make a recommendation to put that in, into effect in December of 2018, when it wasn't going to go into effect for at least 6 months, and it was going to be part of the 2020 budget was the process, we believed.
I'm sorry, specifically what was going to be a part of the 2020 process? The presentation? Or just the proposal overall?
The discussion about the interdiction team at that point was it would be discussed at a future date. It was at least 6 months away, and it's interesting that we haven't heard about it from December of 2018 until now. Either from the sheriff or from administration. So it's like, did we find out another alternative for this, or what happened? But I hadn't heard anything about the interdiction team until basically this morning. So that's, a little disheartening too, so.
Okay. Commissioner LaPointe, did you have?
Yeah, just one, I know, and I have some questions I'll send to you for the next meeting, but just one. You said we've had no additional staffing since, was it 2014 or?
2005 was the last general fund.
The county.
deputies.
The county.
The county has not funded any additional police officers since, I believe, 2004.
Okay, I didn't know it was 4 or 14.
Townships have, but the
Okay.
county has not.
Okay, and one of my questions I'll send to you is, I'd like to get an understanding, we have a sheriff's, or a police presence in the county. There's the community police officers that are funded by the townships and the villages, et cetera. I look at that as, still part of the entire organization. And I think since 2004, or 2004 rather, they've added additional heads. So what I want to know is the total aggregate of all police officers, whether they be funded by the county or by the townships or I'd like to also know by the city. Do they participate equally in terms of police?
Sure, we can
et cetera?
answer those questions.
Okay.
There have been some townships adding officers. There have been some townships that have deleted officers. So I don't know what the net
Okay, but I think
gain
that's
or
part of
loss
the-
is. But I know you're from Acme Township, and they support one officer. That officer is, to make it simple, he is there 1 day per week. 1 out of 5 days, that officer is in Acme Township. It's up to the county-funded deputies, the other 4 days, to handle any issues or complaints in the township.
Okay, but what's the total count of CPOs? They're funded outside the county. It's a big number.
Yes, it's, Garfield funds now, I think, 14 for Garfield Township. And there's one in the peninsula, there's one in Fife Lake, there's one in the village of Kingsley.
I think East Bay's gone up to 3.
East Bay has 2, Blair has 1, recently added one in.
Okay. But I
Green
think
Lake
for us
just-
to
Green
get
Lake
an
Township.
appreciation of the.
Yeah, we have that, we have our
that
staffing
We need to
plan.
understand
Yes, sir.
the entire. Okay.
Yeah.
Sheriff, those CPOs though are not counted in the 68 currently in this one letter from Captain Clark on May of 2019.
Yes, they are.
So whether it's 20, 23 or whatever CPOs, they are included in this 68 number.
Correct.
Okay.
I just have one question for the sheriff. It's probably a hard question. If you want to answer it next week, that's fine. But the question is, would you recommend that this board pay less on our unfunded pension liability in order to fund extra positions in your department?
I will tell you that I think the county has enough money to fund an additional 2 police officers.
Okay.
And I believe the administrator has mentioned this before, the pension debt is a big issue. There are other issues in the county.
Do you feel those issues
We're
are
trying to
big
address
enough
them.
that we should address
I'm not a
those?
finance person.
Okay.
I know Mr. Lapointe is all over the pension debt, okay? I'm not going to comment on that. It's not my position.
Okay.
Can I ask a general question? I think being new on the board, we're sitting here now, we have a revenue forecast, and we're usually conservative on that, and Mr. Wheelock has mentioned, our whole budget process is rather conservative. So if we put something in place now, a budget, and say, okay, this is what we're going to spend, we're not going to hire these additional heads in these various departments. If 4 months into the year, 6 months into the year, it's discovered that our revenue is actually exceeding expectations and our budget, our expenses are less than, is there a issue with reconsidering a hire mid-year and making an adjustment to the budget?
I think we reconsider stuff all the time.
Pardon me?
We consider stuff throughout the year. The budget changes throughout the year. There's nothing to stop us from
So
changing.
if we say at this time, based upon the numbers, I mean, if, I'm just assuming, they make compelling cases on why they need to hire somebody, and we say those are all valuable services, but based upon our numbers that we're sitting, looking at now, we just can't work it into the budget if we're still going to have a balanced budget and make all these other commitments.
But if we're
It doesn't preclude keeping these things in
But
mind.
if you add positions based on the contingency of having extra money this year, what if you don't have it next year? Do you eliminate the positions? I mean, these are people's lives and jobs, too. So,
Well, that
gotta weigh
happens,
in.
I mean, that happens on a yearly basis. So, I mean, if next year the budget crashes and, or the revenue side crashes, then you go in another direction, but, okay.
I mean, I'm equally curious, Commissioner Lapointe, in terms of sort of the process, right? So if I think what I'm hearing from you is, we have to approve this budget and we say, sorry, it's not in the budget, right? But if we find that we have more revenue and our costs are lower than we thought, do the department heads and elected officials have a clear process whereby they could come to administration and the board mid-year, 6 months in, and make those requests? Is that a formalized process, or is there a message that is sent, don't ask us for extra staff except at budget time? I would like to understand that as well.
This is a dynamic process. Yesterday, I was talking to the prosecutor about potential funding sources. So if there's an identification of a funding source that can pay for an employee, we will certainly bring that back to the board at any time during the year. The budget is driven by a process. You have to have a budget approved by this board on a certain date.
Yep.
So that is where we are today, but this is a dynamic process. So the answer, I think, is yes. If we identify additional revenue sources in the future that can support a staff position, we will certainly bring that to the board.
how often do you meet with department heads at a minimum?
A monthly managers meeting, and we have constant meetings throughout the week with different department heads and elected officials. It's a daily discussion with somebody about staffing and needs and requests and wants and can't-haves.
Okay. Commissioner Wheelock?
Well, I think the budget process as a whole is complicated, and Gordy's right. We're very conservative with our numbers, and we always have been, and our finance director is very conservative, and I certainly appreciate that. I think one of the things, and I've done it for a number of years, I have not done it this year, is to take the whole budget and look at it. It's very time consuming, and it's a line by line thing. But I think the one thing that we have to remember is there are many things that are in that budget, whether they're in CIP or equipment purchases or things that are, for lack of a better term, one-time purchases. when we hire personnel, that's an ongoing cost. So it makes a difference to me what I'm doing with the money as to how I do it. Because I can look at, you know, the IT upgrades, for example, and I can say, okay, we need $494,000 with this one line to eliminate Windows 7. Okay, if that money is in the budget, rather than use straight general fund, can I use contingency fund or fund balance for maybe a portion of that and free up additional dollars that we can use for an ongoing position?
Yep.
You know, so for me, and I apologize because I just flat haven't had the time, but we need to take a look at what are we purchasing out of that budget and what are personnel costs? Now, we know that 85% of our general fund budget is personnel costs, just the way it is. And so what other things are we spending out of that money? Is there other options for us to fund that IT purchase or the CIP things that we're doing with facilities? Are there other ways that we can possibly fund that and free up a little bit of money that we can use for something else? But, you know, the bottom line is 85% of our budget historically has been personnel costs. So there's only, out of a $40 million budget, how many dollars do you actually think that those 7 of us sitting here have any control over how it's spent? Because we don't have much. You know, so, you know, it's always nice to talk about, well, we're going to draw the budget, but the fact is 85% of the budget is set before we ever see it because it's personnel costs.
Okay. Madam Prosecutor, would you like to make any comments?
Thank you. I'll make a brief comment, and then I would like to have questions, either questions I can answer today or be prepared to answer next week. When I started at the prosecutor's office in August of 1998, I got here because Dennis LaBelle, prosecutor at the time, added a 7th attorney position. That's the same number that we have today. In 1998, we had no treatment courts. We now have 6. We had technology on a case at that point meant a cassette tape from 911 that we played our 911 call on and maybe some photos. We didn't have cell phone downloads. We didn't have recorded interviews of defendants that had to be redacted to comply with court rules. We didn't have forensic examinations of computers to see if someone was looking up ways to poison someone, ways to, to injure someone. And we didn't have MIDC, which is the biggest change that brings me here to the board this year. What I'm looking at isn't just adding a staff, but I'm actually looking at the office as a whole. And given the new demands that MIDC standards are placing on the office, I'm sort of looking at reconfiguring a staffing plan. The office has traditionally been very top-heavy, if you will, people who have been there for 10 or more years. I need some new people at the bottom, some young attorneys who can handle more district court work and cover the arraignments and the different hearings that we now have to be at because of the Michigan Indigent Defense Commission. So those are things that I ask you to keep in mind, and then I would open it up to questions. Like I said, I'd love to be able to have those questions so that I can answer them on the 30th.
My perception was that crime's down. There's less people breaking the law. The economy's up. There's less people in jail.
Our numbers have gone down. Okay. That's true. But the complexity of the cases that we handle has increased tremendously. Just a quick example. Kit Tholen and I were talking yesterday about basically a simple drunk driving case that he's handling. But now there are a number of different surveillance videos from locations around the city where this individual was seen. There are in-car camera videos that we have. So every single case we do is different than it was. So even though the number of cases has gone down, the workload in evaluating the evidence of each case and presenting that case to the jury has increased. The decrease in the jail numbers is very much related to the treatment courts that we now take part in. And while those are obviously incredible, they reduce recidivism, they help the people that are involved in them, they help keep our community safer, it takes a significant amount of time for my office, because it means for each one of those treatment courts, we have to have someone who is dedicated to that court, who acts as the gatekeeper, who is knowledgeable about whether it's addiction or domestic violence or mental illness, so that they can be an active participant on the team for that specific treatment court. And in order for those treatment courts to receive the funding that they get each year, whichever attorney from my office is assigned to that court has to attend a certain number of hours of training. Some of them are 3-day trainings.
Okay. Commissioner Jewett?
Noel, do you currently have any open positions?
No.
Okay.
Commissioner LaPointe?
I read your, the one sheet that you gave on the justification on there. You mentioned that you lost a senior person at a high rate of pay and the person you're coming in as a lower pay grade. When you do your presentation, could you come up with what the net cost is?
Absolutely.
Fully burdened net cost above and beyond what
Sure.
would be
And I
helpful.
understand that that's going to change, and that's going to,
Yeah,
costs are going to grow with that person,
but yeah, just to see what the.
I'm going to retire someday, and so are the other people in my office, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Kafia?
Prosecutor Muggenberg, I am curious if I can appreciate that even though the numbers have gone down in terms of bodies, right, coming through the courts necessarily, that the complexity both from the sort of technology side and also the types of courts, which is a good thing. We want to have a domestic violence and a sobriety court and a recovery court and a veterans court and a community outreach court. But I'm curious to see a breakdown of how your staffing ends up getting allocated to all of these courts. I don't know what that looks like. I don't spend time in those courtrooms with you, but for us to appreciate what that actually means in terms of splitting up your staff time. So if there's a way that you can help us really look at that and understand it, that would be really helpful. And then the MIDC piece, I'm getting from this one pager that we got from the administration that you all are finding that you need to spend a lot more time. You have to attend their initial arraignment now, and that the questions that the defense attorneys now are asking through MIDC require a lot more work on your office's end to supply that information. Is that accurate?
Two things. So one, MIDC attorneys are now, every single defendant who's arraigned now has an attorney with them.
Right.
That means that our office, and this isn't just here, this is statewide, prosecutors' offices.
Which is
are
a good
now-
thing.
Right, are now staffing arraignments, because that's the time not only when a bond or a bail amount is set, but when we decide on what conditions are necessary. So I want someone from my office there to be able to speak to that, to be able to make sure that if it's a domestic violence, there's no contact with the defendant, and a lot of times with the children, if the children were there to witness the violence. We are able to argue for bond, sometimes for reduced bond, or, we may know maybe it's not necessary to have this person go through additional, drug and alcohol testing if they're there on a retail fraud case. So we want the chance to be heard there. Additionally, through the MIDC, there is more money being spent on experts, more money on investigators, and MIDC attorneys now go through a number of trainings themselves, which are paid for through MIDC, we have seen an influx of motions that we hadn't seen in the past. So it's all time and money that we have to spend to respond to that. I figured it out, and without talking about the afternoon arraignments, so just the morning arraignments, Monday through Friday. Just to cover that, MIDC spends in Grand Traverse County $150,000 a year. My office is being asked to respond to that, to cover those arraignments and all that extra that I just talked about, with no additional resources at all.
And this is pretty new, just one piggyback, and I know Commissioner Wheelock had his hand up, but just to piggyback, as you're thinking about what to bring back to us on this topic, and I know this is new, right? 2018 was when the MIDC, the standards were introduced, right, MIDC. But I'm curious if any other of your colleagues in other counties, they're all dealing with this too. Are they finding creative funding solutions of any kind? That are not just general
I will speak to that.
fund.
Most of them are going to their boards to ask.
Doing the same, sure. But if
yes.
anybody is like being innovative and
Right.
coming up with solutions that don't draw from the general fund, I think it would be useful to at least ask that question of your colleagues
Sure.
and come back if there's something you need us to approve, but it's not necessarily general fund.
Right. And as Mr. Alger mentioned, we are working on some ways. Maybe I'll be able to speak to that next week. I don't know. Still
Okay.
new.
Commissioner Hundley next, and then Commissioner Wheelock.
Thank you. It was a very, very silently or whatever. I guess my only question would be whether now or next week to talk a little bit in depth about the 6 specialty courts, about not just the time that's required. Or maybe it is. Maybe it's just a question of, because there are 6 courts and you have to go to each one, but to the extent that they are different specialties and you have to know, I mean, you're talking about the additional continuing education and that kind of thing, what that additional burden looks like in some detail.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Commissioner
did
Wheelock, did you have something?
Well, at last night's Community Corrections Board meeting, a lot of the same discussion was happening. You know, we're looking at our 2020 budget that's being presented to the state. We have areas that we don't spend any money anymore, you know, because things have changed. The MIDC changed. One of the things is these people qualify for Medicaid instead of us having to figure out how we're paying for their medical bills and those kind of things. Treatment costs, but we have other areas like the gatekeeper programs and some of those that we're expending 158% of what was budgeted. So, you know, we're just all trying to push that same piece of pie into different slots. But at the end of the day, it's become much more complicated. You know, Noel mentioned the experts and the investigators, the amount of time that MIDC is bringing investigators in to provide all of this information. You know, Janet and I were having a discussion afterwards about that whole lien thing and how we provide them with information. It sounds easy, but it's not.
It's not at all.
Very complicated, and it's not just, yeah, here's the key to lien, you can go get it. Number one, there's a lot of information on there that they shouldn't have, but there's pieces of information that the statute is very specific that they are entitled to. But somebody has to provide them that information. They don't have access to it. It either has to come from the court or it has to come from the prosecutor. Now, it's not fair for defense attorneys to walk into court with an arraignment without knowing that this defendant that they have been hired or appointed to defend has a criminal history that's 3 pages long. The guy didn't tell them that. But without having access to that information before they walk in there, how are they prepared to argue what bond the guy should get, what conditions for bond he should have, or all that, because they don't have that information. Now, I believe, and I believe we're all in agreement, they need that information. The problem is, how do we provide it to them? In what form and how? You know, a county who will remain nameless, I was told simply emails the lien information. Well, I know for a fact that that's illegal, so we won't even mention it along the way, you know. So, you know, there's opportunities to print it off, you know, and give it out. You know, I think now we literally hand them the screen when they walk into arraignment, and here it is on the screen in front of you. Well, that doesn't give anybody an opportunity to prepare for the trial. So I understand what Noel's talking about, how much more complicated it is, because we spent an hour and a half talking about that very same thing last night.
Yeah, I wish I would have added up the amount of hours, if not days, I have spent on the lien issue in the last few months.
Absolutely, but yet I understand both sides of it. You know, I understand the demands on your time and your staff's time, but I also understand that it is that defendant's right
Oh,
to
absolutely.
be properly defended in court, and the attorney cannot defend them in court if they don't have the access to that information. So we've got to figure it out, and we will. I know we will.
And I think to some extent, we have figured it out. We're still working on getting it to them in a timely fashion for arraignment, but we now have an encrypted system that we can, we email them a link when they send an appearance so that they can go to a website and get it.
I think we will get there.
Yeah.
But it's time consuming, and somebody has to do that work.
So on that, we did present an MIDC amended compliance plan to the state. One of the amendments is to give more funds to district court to allocate staff time to run liens for defense attorneys. So I think with what the prosecutor's office and the courts are doing, we do have a fix, and it will be fixed.
Okay.
I had a question for the prosecutor. So you're asking for a full extra FTE. And if that doesn't happen, what doesn't get done in your office?
So most of what my office does is statutorily obligated. The things that we don't have to do by statute are go to interviews at the Children's Advocacy Center. Right now, we sit in on all of those that happen in our county because we're the ones that have to defend that interview. When it's talked about in court, we have to say, yes, this was a forensically sound interview and here's why. We won't be able to do that. We have attorneys that train staff and volunteers at the Women's Resource Center. We have attorneys that take part in sexual assault training. One of them, again, Mr. Tholen, does a lot of these, but they're called safe team trainings, where we go out with members of the Children's Advocacy Center and we talk to TCAPS, Kingsley, local high schools about if you see sexual assault, if it's happening to you, what do you do? And also not just to the teams, but to the coaches. We take part in Child Death Review Team, which meets 4 times a year to discuss suspicious child deaths in our county. We provide core training for law enforcement. Charlie Hamlin is on the Vulnerable Adult Task Force. He meets with that task force, and he also has asked for grants in the past to do some trainings on that. We speak at local conferences. We're part right now of implementing Hope Not Handcuffs in the area, another sort of form of pretrial diversion, getting to the people who need help before they end up in the system. We have internships. In the summer, we have an intern from the Prosecuting Attorneys Association, a law school intern. Right now, we also participate in a local internship program through the high school. We started doing that because the last prosecutor, Judge Cooney, his kids all took part in the program, not as prosecutors, but medical engineering fields. And so we felt that that was a good give back to the community. And so every semester, we have a high school student who comes in, who job shadows us, who does different tasks for us. We also work on policy review and advising law enforcement. And frankly, some of those things will have to go by the wayside if we don't have.
Okay, so those are things you're currently doing with your current staff.
Yes.
How are you accomplishing them with a full FTE missing?
I have people right now that are working 60 or more hours a week, between 50 and 60 hours a week, depending. Charlie Hamlin is routinely at the office by 5:30 every morning. I think all of us work on the weekends. And frankly, as a boss, it kills me because the kind of stuff that we're dealing with on a daily basis is the kind of stuff that you need to leave for at least 24 hours, if not 48, so that you can come back fresh again on Monday and work at it. I mean, we're again, watching interviews of children who have been sexually abused. We're looking at images of fatal car crashes, of child sexually abused material, so looking at pictures of kiddie porn. We're interviewing victims who have been traumatized, whether it's, rape or domestic violence. And so I'm overworking my people right now.
Okay.
And just, can I?
Question, how much staff time is used supporting the Board of Commissioners as our legal counsel?
I'm looking at.
Because I know we ask a lot of questions.
Probably
I don't think you have to come up with it on the spot, Mr.
Yeah.
Tholen. Maybe that could be
Yeah. I
don't
included
wanna-
in
I
the
wouldn't wanna
presentation.
Right, I think at this point, we'd be
underestimate that.
guessing, especially because both of us do that.
It's probably fair to say it's a little higher this term than the last, maybe. Just attending meetings alone, but.
Right, meetings are a little longer lately.
Yeah,
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I had a question also, just to your point about how you're accomplishing this with your current team. This is more of just a technical question. I appreciate what you laid out in terms of the substance.
Right.
You need a break from that, and I completely get that. But just in terms of, I want to make sure I understand, are those staff members salaried, so they're just working however many hours, or are they getting overtime? How does that work?
No, they're salaried.
They're
So
salaried,
just-
okay,
yeah,
so you do the job till it's done.
Till it's done.
You
I
don't-
have attorneys that have more vacation time than they will ever use because they don't have the time to take it. So, the other issue is when I talk about staffing, it's not just getting the job done in that sense, but we have, for instance, we had I think it was the second week of September, I had a circuit court jury trial that was scheduled for 2 days. We had one attorney who was on a vacation that had been planned for close to a year, and we had an attorney who was involved in a 3-day training as part of the new Veterans Treatment Court. And my trial went a day longer than anticipated, and that's not uncommon. Judge Power likes to say that jury trials are like large vitamin pills. Once you start swallowing, you don't stop till it's done. And so I was in circuit court for an extra day. District court, because we had family court, 2 district court judges, and Magistrate Rogers running arraignments, literally was at a standstill at times that day, because we didn't have enough prosecutors, literally didn't have enough bodies to cover all the courtrooms that were going at the time. So in that case, you've got judges, defense attorneys, members of the public, bailiffs, everyone just standing there waiting for a prosecutor so that they can continue to work.
Okay. Commissioner Jewett?
Noel, next week there, can you give us some insight on your guys' funding? I see, you guys got some additional $153,000 approximately in 2008 from the MIDC, but can you just give us some insight?
Yeah.
Where?
And again, that went to MIDC, that didn't come to my office.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
but even so, just so we can have some clarity on
Yeah.
that, where your funding comes from.
Yeah, I can talk about that. And again, we have some other potential revenue issues in the works. But one thing I would point out is I run a public safety office. We're not in the business of making money. So while there are grants available to us, to expect me to fund my positions based on revenue, it's not feasible.
Right.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Any,
I know that there was a desire by the board to speak with Ming and DeBruce about the construction code and IT offices, so if I could ask the commissioners to address their concerns or questions to those 2 folks.
Commissioner LaPointe, that was you.
That'd be me. Yeah, a couple things. The IT budget, we keep talking about, there's a plan going forward in terms of the IT budget, upgrading servers and Windows 7 to Windows 10, et cetera. And we don't have the detail in their budget, but I guess I'd like to get some understanding of, going forward over the next couple of years, what are we looking at? Is this going to taper off, or is this going to continue on? And the second part of that is the project we talked about with the construction code office. That's a big, in my estimation, not knowing the details of never implementing a system like that, but that's a big deal. That's a complex system install. If you read through the proposal from Taylor, they give a list of headcount that's going to have to be added, and the consulting fees dwarf the cost of the software. So I guess my question on that is, I'd like to understand, we've built into the budget, or I guess we've paid for the consulting, well, that's a question. In the contract was bundled in the consulting fees. I assume we paid for that in 2018. A question would be, we probably haven't budgeted for any additional consulting fees this year, but that's not a guarantee. So I'd like to know, is that number possibly going to go up beyond what the projection was? And the other thing is, can we cover all the costs of that implementation that's borne by IT by putting those costs in the construction office, which has a fairly sizable fund balance? That would be, it's a legal question, a practical question. But can we shed some general fund costs that are in IT over to the construction code office for this implementation?
The costs associated with Tyler and the other costs that are related to it that are identified as a construction code or inspection fund can absolutely be charged to the construction fund. But to take costs that are somehow related, that are a general fund cost or something that another department should bear, it can't legally be charged to.
In their proposal, I think, if I remember correctly, they recommended two or three headcount working on this project to implement it. Are all of those people in the budget going forward?
They're not in the current staffing plan for construction code, and I'm not sure where those positions will ultimately end up in the staffing plan.
Well, we're going to certainly start. We bought this software in December of last year.
With the software purchase, there was a deposit or a payment made, and then as the work is being performed, we're paying for those services, so it covers multiple years in the budget. It wasn't fully paid for in 2018 because a majority of the work hadn't even started at that point. So you've got costs and a deposit, which was probably not even expense. That's a prepaid item. And as the work is being done, we're being billed for that cost and paying for it as the project moves forward.
Okay, and that was.
And that cost is in the inspection fund, Fund 542. That's not a general fund cost.
Okay, that was a question. So all those consulting costs from Tyler is in construction code?
Correct.
Well, make sure the Carlisle-Wortman report is different than what the consultation services provided by Tyler are.
No, I understand.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, that was in part of the contract.
Okay.
So I think the answer is yes, they're doing that.
Yes.
Okay, so that cost is in, but in the other report we got said, okay, that's fine, but in order to implement this thing, we are going to have to add additional headcount. And I think there was 2 or 3 heads that they said we're going to have to add. Are those 2 or 3 additional heads in their associated costs in the budget?
Not in the 2020 budget recommendation, no. Those costs, the deputy building director and an office manager, I believe, were the 2 staff that Mr. Carlisle is recommending that we consider adding. We're not in the 2020 budget at that point, but our anticipation is once we get through the training with Tyler and start recognizing what we want to do with that CP3 model, those costs will be absorbed mostly, if not completely, by the construction code office.
But we have to remember that the Tyler system and all of that will have other benefits throughout the county than just a construction
That's
code.
correct.
So the benefit to the GIS department or whatever we choose, that benefit cannot be funded by the construction code office. So, there's going to be benefit to other departments throughout the county as this is implemented. But those costs are not borne out by the building permits. Those have to be borne by the general fund.
But okay. Well, I guess the question is, are we going to have to add an IT person at any point to work full-time or considerable amount of their time implementing this system? Because that was I believe, one of the points in the proposal.
Not through Mr. Carlisle's recommendation.
There was no IT?
No. His recommendations were specific to Bruce's office and staff. That was the deputy building code director and the office manager, and those costs can be borne by the construction code.
Hey, can I just comment?
There was one in the budget presentation, though.
I want to somewhat disagree with Sonny's comment. So the CP3 model, it relates to all permitting. So soil erosion, DPW, Those aren't general fund costs. They can be covered by their own separate.
But there won't
Permit
be,
fees.
I guess I misspoke, because they won't be funded by construction code. You know, the road commission will do, the DPW will.
So their fees that they issue in connection to their permit reviews could cover the cost. So there's no anticipated general fund cost to the CP3 model.
Okay, and if that changes, you'll let us know.
Yeah, so much like we spoke about earlier, sometime in 2020, I expect to come back to this board and say, we are now going to present to you the addition of 2 staff in Bruce's office and make a proposal to the Board of Commissioners with a demonstration or a presentation to say, this is what we're looking at and this is how we're going to pay for it.
Just go back, the presentation did show IT staff
Yep, 2 of them.
Or
being added.
1.2.
Point 2, Secretary IT, and 1 network administrator.
That's
Was the request. It's
Okay.
not being recommended.
That's what our staff is asking for. That was not from Carlisle Warman.
Okay, but in support of it, I assume it's part in support of that?
Not necessarily.
Okay. I just want to make sure that if costs associated with that project can be borne by that department and not affect the general fund, we do everything legally that we can. And if in fact we've taken all the software and consulting costs to date and put it into that office, the fact that that product will support other things like GIS, et cetera, we've kind of said the costs are going to all be borne in that department.
Ms. Mays has a request for a network administrator and .2 of a secretarial position in IT, and she can explain her request if she wishes.
Okay.
That network administrator is the second year that she has asked for this position, so it is not connected to the implementation of Tyler.
But that is a discussion, I believe, based on our earlier discussion, is a discussion that she will have with administration, not with commissioners. I believe, if my memory
Yeah,
is
Sonny, my
right-
question was not to get into the detail of that, but just I want to make sure I understood, because that whole project is going to be fairly expensive, that all costs from a budget standpoint are not coming out of the general fund if at all possible. That was my only interest in all of that.
Dean is very good at that, so. I guess one thing that I would note that late 2017, early 2018, Ming provided us with, what, a 5-year plan to
3-year
upgrade
plan.
all of this?
Yep.
You know,
3-year.
and was it 3-year plan or a 5-year plan? 3 years. And we're a little over a year into that program, and we've made leaps and bounds and improvements. You know, I think we need to acknowledge what we've accomplished in a short period of time. And we all know that technology changes faster than I change my socks, you know, it's just the way it is. But we really truly have a plan of how we're going to upgrade this stuff. And I think if we stick to the plan, we'll get there. And Ming can speak to that. I believe we're doing a good job with implementing the plan to get us where we need to be technology-wise.
Thank you.
Correct?
Yeah.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? All right. Any other budget topics before we go to second public comment?
Oh, I do
I
have.
guess the one thing that, if you could, Nate and Dean and Chris, if you could help us to identify those things that are in the 2020 budget that are truly one-time expenditures, whether it be vehicles or other things, we may or may not be willing to have a conversation about using, whether it be contingency fund or fund balance for some of those expenditures, which may free up some money. You know, they say I have not taken the time or had the time to go through it line by line, but I do know that, you know, 85% of our budget is personnel costs. We do not have an opportunity to do much about that. It's just the way it is. 70% of our budget involves the sheriff, the prosecutor, and the courts. Not within our control either. But the amount of money that the 7 of us truly have any control over is pretty small. So it would be nice to just kind of, all right, those pieces are set aside. We can't do anything about that. What money is available for us to actually try to push around?
Okay, Commissioner Kafia and then Hunley.
I would like to ask administration to just come back at the next with just where we are as the county commission with our budget. Are we within our budget? Are we over budget for our portion? Please.
So we only are really dealing with the general fund as far as our deal. So there's an enterprise fund out there that's fairly new. It's mentioned in the audit, and I just when we first came on board, we took a tour of the PACE building, and it looks great, and the plan sounds great, but it seems like we're very extremely forward thinking relative to the rest of the nation about the program, and so it's just one that I kind of have my eye on as it could be great, or we could have a liability that kind of comes back to us down the way. So if that's, I don't know when the appropriate time to pull that out is, but since we're talking about budget, I guess that's been on my mind as we're seeing what's available to us. They have a bond that's going to cover everything, and I think the pavilions backstops the bond, and then we backstop the pavilions somewhere along there, if I'm not mistaken, or you can.
So do you want a status report on the PACE building or the project itself? Are they up and running?
Yes, status report on their, because they were going into operations, as I recall. I mean, they were in the last couple of months of kind of getting everything up and running, and then they would actually.
There's a good report if you're interested.
Okay.
Go to the pavilions, or excuse me, go to the website on agendas and all that, and the pavilions.
On the county website or the
Yeah,
pavilion?
no, on the pavilions.
Okay.
And their agenda, and they have a current update on what their time frame is and where they stand on budget and
Okay.
et cetera, et cetera. If you don't get that, just let me know and I can send you
All right,
something.
perfect. That's probably all I need then.
Oh, okay.
Oh, for
I
now.
could have Corey Hansen come and give you a status update if you wish.
Well, I'll start with this, thank
Okay.
you. Not knowing all of the places to look, and I should probably look before I open my mouth, but anyway.
You don't know where to look all the time, so
Yeah,
it's
so-
best to ask.
So I'll ask again if I have more questions.
Okay, are we ready for?
May I, before you wrap up, I'd just
Okay.
like to make some general comments. if I
All
could.
right. Commissioner LaPointe, you have something else?
Yeah, just a couple things. I remember early in the year, they were talking about the budget process, and we were all asking questions, and Sonny was saying, you can look at all the detail if you want, and you can spend hours getting to that, and lots of good questions can come out of it. But I have a couple of general ones. I had asked Dean to give me a copy to prepare for me a total by general account number. So example, for account number 704.00, everybody uses that for overtime. So you can say, let me see what the total overtime is for the entire department. Now that goes beyond the 38 million general fund, that's a $68 million, the total, because a lot of the stuff is outside the general fund. And that kind of gives you and I can send this on to you folks, and take a look, it's kind of interesting. Question I've got, Dean, is in the 2019 budget, for health and optical and dental, it was $4.6 million was the budget for 2019. Now, I don't have the actual, but the budget for 2020 is $3.7 million. It's a 20% drop in health and optical and dental.
Yeah, the 2019 budget, we budgeted an increase in health insurance, which was a little bit higher than what our actual costs are going to be, and it also included funding of the health savings account amounts. I do not have in the 2020 budget all of the health savings amounts in the health insurance line item. I have some of that tucked away in the 702 line item and also in a contingency line item for a couple of reasons. Number one, we haven't completed any negotiations with our labor contracts. There are labor contracts, though, the 312 groups, primarily the sheriff's office, where they are budgeted in the 716 line item. So there's some work that needs to be done to move the numbers into that 716 line item. I
Okay,
have
so
not
they'll
done that.
eventually end up there to see what year over year.
But we are over budgeted in 2019 in that line item across all funds.
Yeah, the actual in 18 was 4.1 million. So I would, well, anyway, I guess the answer is you're still moving the numbers
Yeah, that's
in the
still,
detail.
I need to do some work there to move some money that I have in. We budgeted a little higher for salary and wage increases, and I did put money in a contingency line item. I was hoping we would have some contracts settled, but we're not there yet, so.
I've got some other questions, but I can meet, I don't want to bore everybody with the details.
Okay.
Meet with you separately?
And any commissioners that have specific questions, Dean's always taking my calls. I think he'll take yours too. Just reach out to him.
So just some general comments for discussion purposes. This is the Board of Commissioners budget. And I know so you tell us what you want in your budget and we'll make it work. Our primary objective to this point has been to present to you a $40.5 million budget that is balanced. It has no reduction of services. It has a cost of living adjustment in the budget, has health care in the budget. It has a $7 million pension payment. It has a $300,000 OPEB payment. So that has been our station, and that has been our responsibility to this date. I'm very willing to listen to any input and take input from the commissioners or the elected officials about where they want to go with the budget, but our job is to make sure the county is financially secure not only in 2020, but in 2040. And it starts by maintaining that pie. And that pie is important. Last year, we had a $900,000 ask for staffing. Okay, this year, we had a $900,000 ask for staffing. So instead of a $40.5 million budget, we'd be at a $42 million budget very quickly. So the revenues have to be there. Something has to drive that side of the budget. And I'm not going to say anything about the services. As you look through the services and you talk to elected officials and the department heads, I get it. All of these services have value. They all have value, but what do we do and how do we pay for them between now and 2040 or whatever number you want to make or pick? We have to be responsible with our revenues and expenditures so that we can take care of all of our services. The board, the general fund is we have most interaction with, but the board oversees every other budget as well. So you do have oversight, and so that gives you input, and that gives you the ability to make comments and have interaction with department heads and local officials that have those budgets. I'm open for any recommendations by the board, and we'll have those to you by the final date of the budget adoption, which has yet to be determined.
Okay. You ready for public comment now? Okay, you got more?
Well, we got 20 minutes.
Okay, you got to use up your 50, okay.
I'll ask you a couple of general questions. Again, just looking through, and I'm looking at last year's, because I don't have the detail for 2020. Here's a question. Now, these aren't big departments. Soil and erosion department is funded through the general fund.
It was for the early part of 2018, and we moved it to the health department in last year. So it's fully funded in the health department, Fund 222 in 2019, but you don't see any budget in, that's Department 276 on your report.
Okay, but
So
does the money for, now in the health department, a lot of the money comes from grants and other sort of state and whatever, but we also make an allocation out of the general fund to the health department.
That's correct.
I guess my question is soil and erosion, the money to operate that department was around $60-some thousand, or I don't know, that's last was in 18. Is that money coming out of the general fund, or is that coming from some other source?
When it was a department in the general fund, the revenues, the permit fees were in the general fund as well, but that's all been transitioned to the health department, to Fund 222. It's coordinated with their environmental health activities, So it's fully, it was in the general fund, and that's why you're seeing that department on that general fund
Okay.
report. But last year, we moved it out of the general fund and put it under the health department for a
So is
lot of
any,
reasons.
is any general fund monies going directly to fund that function?
Without looking at how, there could be some of the county appropriation that's going to fund that operation if the revenues don't fully fund the cost of the staffing that we have allocated there. So we do appropriate out of the general fund. It's Department 968. If you have the detail sheet in front of you, for 2000,
Okay.
I mean, it's a $1.4 million appropriation. Some of that could be funding the soil erosion function that we've transferred to the health
Okay,
department.
that's, I don't need to know
Yeah,
any more
there
than
is
that.
some, we leverage the appropriation for all the
Okay.
different programs that,
We have, I mean, yes, as Commissioner Wheelock, we have line item budgets that would just blow you away with detail. And if you want that, I'd be more than happy to
Well,
provide
that's,
it
you
to
eventually
you.
put that out, you publish
It's
that
on the
eventually.
website. Why anybody would really want to spend time going through that always amazes
I can
me.
use the search mechanism, PDF, and get one other one, since you have a few
Sorry to
minutes.
hear that.
It's a special person to do this job.
242, county surveyor. Now, again, the only thing I can see is 2019, but we budget $68,000.
We did away with the actual elected position, but we do have a state grant for remonumentation that's received.
Okay,
So what you're seeing there, Commissioner, is that grant that we received to, GPS, officially mark
Yeah.
survey points. It's a mandated function. The grant fully funds the cost of that.
okay, so that
It's a
doesn't.
state grant
it's-
that will run from $40,000 to $70,000 on an annual basis.
Yeah, if it's not coming out of the general fund, I'm,
No, the cost of those services are covered by the state grant.
Brownfield, last one, Brownfield administration. Where's that money coming from?
When we had a planning and development department, part of that department was comprised or consisted of the brownfield component. So there was a budget that was in the general fund for the staff that was assigned to that. It was funded, for the most part, from the admin money that we earned on the various brownfield projects that we have. We have since basically transferred that out of the general fund, and it's fully funded in the brownfield activity directly. We've hired a consultant who took the place of the staffing that we used to have in place. So yes, it's transitioned out of the general fund, and you see that there's no budget for that in 2020.
So we can't, and I don't want to, when we see a budget or a department, like Brownfield or some bunch of these other ones, we can't readily identify how much of the funding for that is coming from the general fund versus other sources, can we?
If you ask for that information,
Okay.
I can
Okay,
provide that. I
but
mean,
just looking at the detail, you can't say, and I don't
That's
want.
correct. We're providing you with very high-level summary information. Behind those, all of those numbers would be the line item, the detail.
Okay.
Certainly willing to, tomorrow I have a pretty slow day if you want to come in, or if you have questions, between now and the 30th, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll provide you with whatever level of detail you need or want.
And you have.
I now know that tomorrow I'm going to work Dean pretty hard because acknowledge that he
Well,
has a slow day.
the challenge with this, that there is a lot of documentation. We're trying to comply with, you heard from both the prosecutor. We have statutes that we have to follow as far as the format of the budget. Then you're also trying to build your accounting system to incorporate the budget process, which has to comply with state law. And then you're also trying to make that same system be what you can use to produce your financial statement. to comply with accounting standards. So we're not doing this in this format because we want to or because it's easy for you to review and understand. We're doing it because this is what we have to do to comply with the public acts, the state laws regarding the budget process, and so that it's in a fashion that we can roll it into the financial statement that's required by GASB.
There's a lot of things we could put in much better line items that we could read, that I would understand a lot better than the way we do it, but it is what we have to do to be compliant.
Nate's PowerPoint presentation that he provided was far more, that's a lot more glamorous than what your finance department provides you, that's for sure. It's hard to compete with him and his PowerPoints.
I have a quick follow-up question, well, a question for Dean. The line items by department, their budget amounts, does that include, are you rolling their pension obligation specific to their department into that number?
What we've done for 2020, we basically allocated an amount that was very similar to what was allocated to the departments in 2019. The additional $1.1 million payment is in a separate department in the general fund at this point in time. And that retirement obligation for the defined benefit is allocated based on payroll. We're using labor cost, total payroll, as the basis for allocating that. That's not perfect for a lot of reasons, but it's probably the best allocation method that we have, in my opinion. And one of the reasons that's a pretty good allocation is because we've had very few changes in staffing. Since 2000, 2001, prior to 2001, everyone was on the defined benefit plan. In 2001, we transitioned to the defined contribution. If you're an employee that has the defined contribution, that is fully costed to the department that employee works. But we have departments where they don't have an employee. My department is one of those departments that none of the employees in my department are currently earning a defined benefit pension. But I had retirees that are drawing that. So that's one of the arguments for allocating that based on total payroll. We're still that unfunded piece. And you'll see Commissioner LaPointe ask about, we have 3 different lines, 3 different expenditure accounts in the budget for pension costs. One is the defined contribution, which you pay that cost this year based on when payroll is processed. There's no future cost. You pay that amount. It's not that case with the defined benefit. So it's tricky. We want that cost allocated, across payroll because we have state and federal grants that recognize that's a legitimate benefit cost, and they reimburse us. They cover that cost. So,
but it still skews the cost of doing business.
I'm not so sure it does. I mean, the alternative would be to take the $7 million payment. What fund do we put that payment in? Do we put it all in the general fund? How do we allocate it to the friend of the court where I get 66% of that cost back from the federal grants that we receive? So we have the secondary road.
Why you do it, I just
the
don't
secondary
necessarily
road
like it.
patrol. The secondary road patrol grant, which is a very small state grant, allows us to charge that cost against that grant, if I'm correct. So any place we can charge that legitimately and have some external source help us pay that, we're looking under those rocks to do that, so.
Fair enough. Okay, second public comment. Anyone from the public wish to address the board at this time? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Jail. How are you?
Under the wire.
Good news is, even though they got spread here, there, and everywhere, we all use the same calendar, 7:05.